Kazari, Masuma Kazari.
Saguna Kaga.
Masuma Kazari.
Masuma. Sharifa Kassoum.
Sharifa Kassoum. Batul Haidari. Batul
Haidari, yeah.
In fact, that's not from one of the stories in this book. It's one of her other stories, but don't worry, we'll work around that. We're not actually featuring her anymore. So
it doesn't matter.
No, it's just that we're not going to hear more about it.
About the book.
Just say,
Good evening, and welcome to our guests here in Europe House and those who are following our proceedings online. I'm Susanne Oberhaus. I'm the head of the European Parliament office here in London. This week we marked International Women's Day, and in the European Parliament in Strasbourg, the Ukrainian writer Oksana Zabushko addressed members in a formal sitting. She told them she was used in her writings to give a voice to women and to fighting for their rights. But for the first time now, she has to stand up for women's rights to life itself. This resonates very strongly against the background of the subject of our event this evening, the situation of Afghan women, in particular after the return of the Taliban. With this discussion, we also want to honor the group of 11 prominent Afghan women who were shortlisted last year for the European Parliament Sakharov Prize, its prestigious human rights award. These women were united in their mutual cause of defending human rights and in particular the rights of women in their homeland. We, as European Parliament Office, are very proud to host tonight's event. My Pen is the Wing of a Bird, new fiction by Afghan women. This anthology of short stories is the fruit of a program that works with writers marginalized in their communities or conflict, initiated by Lucy Hanna, who will be sharing our panel with the journalist Zaguna Kahar, one of the translators, and Masuma Kasari, one of the contributors who will joining us online from Sweden. The FT called it Unbowed Voices and underlines that for some, sharing their writing became an act of moral support and defiance. War won't take our creativity away. My pen is the wing of a bird. It would tell you these thoughts we are not allowed to think, these dreams we are not allowed to dream. This is how Batul Haidari writes in one of her stories. Before handing over now to our panel, I need to excuse our MEP, Semira Rafaela, who is unfortunately due to current events no longer able to join us tonight. But it is my pleasure to hand over to Nicola Dahrendorf, a human rights and humanitarian practitioner with a long experience in protection, peace building and conflict resolution in conflict and post-war contexts, who will lead us through the discussions tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Susanne, for the introduction and for setting the scene, and a very warm welcome to all of you. It's really a pleasure to see you. Please feel free to move forward as much as possible, because it's meant to be kind of, I think it's more in tune with the event, because we are discussing kind of particular types of writing. I think this event is now almost more important than ever. With Ukraine, which I have no doubt is on everyone's mind, and that's unsurprising and also very justified. But it's, I think, also really important to stay aware of other acute and present crises, such as Afghanistan, especially as so many lives and so many worlds were turned upside down only 6 months ago. Above all, how they impact on women and children, and particularly women and girls. But at the same time, and really above all, the creative expression in the middle of such a massive upheaval. Now, just to give you a quick sort of summary of how we're orchestrating tonight's event, which I think has a number of very interesting conversations, as well as, I hope, a lot of food for thought. We will hear from two of the authors. One of the authors is will be online in Sweden, I hope, and live. And the other author, it's a pre-recorded video, and she's in Afghanistan. We also have with us Lucy Hanna, who is the founder and director of Untold Narratives, which nurtured and shepherded this process really from beginning to end. Lucy has worked in a number of very fractured contexts where there has been little, if any, publishing history or creative industry. She has worked with the Commonwealth Writers, which she founded, and she also worked for the BBC. And I'm also really delighted to introduce Saguna Kagar, who translated a number of these stories. She's one of the translators of My Pen is the Wing of a Bird. She has been involved in the project in various ways also from the beginning. She's a journalist. She works at the BBC. And I think she's really focused her career working on Afghan women and speaking on their behalf. And then I'd like to introduce Masuma Kasari, who I hope will appear on your screens like magic, from Sweden. And she will appear eventually, so let me just tell you quickly about her. I'm really delighted to introduce her because it's such a pleasure to have one of the authors live with us. She is a refugee in Sweden at the moment, and we will also hear from one of her stories. And at the end, we have a pre-recorded link with Sharifa Passoon, who is a writer who is part of this anthology. And she is actually based in Afghanistan, so that's why it's pre-recorded. Now, in terms of, let me just quickly, before we move into the conversations, and there she is. Wonderful to see you. By the way, Masuma our exchanges will be translated by Zari, so we will have to work with that, yes. The situation in Afghanistan remains profoundly troubling. And there's a humanitarian catastrophe 6 months after the Taliban insurgents. All Afghan lives and the country have been turned upside down. People are facing hunger, massive food insecurity, unemployment, and a pernicious impact on women and girls. There's a shattered health system which faces multiple epidemics. And now the economy is now fairly infamously incapacitated by frozen international money. Many Afghans have been heading for the exit, that's if they can. Some were left behind and have to hide. Others are displaced amidst all of this within the country. And back in Afghanistan, repression and severe restrictions on women and girls in particular have grown since the Taliban takeover in August 2021. And some rights groups are saying that we are witnessing the attempt to steadily erase women and girls from public life. But not so when you read these extraordinarily collection of short stories, where I think the global is very deeply interwoven with the very intensely personal and also the very local descriptions. Each story provides a snapshot, and at times, at least I found, very poignant and painful details of the real lives in different parts of Afghanistan. And that is far away from the reaches of cameras and of journalists in very private spaces. This is an anthology that was very carefully, and I think actually exquisitely crafted by Lucy Hanna and her team. It began during a very different time, and oddly, it could probably be viewed as complicated with I-4 NATO forces and explosions and many complicated interlocking international and national issues. But in hindsight, it was possibly, oddly, a more innocent time. And then events changed into a deeply complex process, both for developing the anthology, but also for Afghanistan. So, Lucy, I'd like to turn to you, and it would be really helpful, I think, for all of us to hear, why did you do this? How did this project come about?
I just wonder, we should tell Massimo what we'll come to her.
Yes,
in a
thank you.
minute.
Yeah.
برای خودت میاییم در چند لحظه اول و لوسی میپرسن یک سوال باز بر شما اوکی
خواهش میکنم بله مشکل نیست
yes there's no problem
Listen to Lucy banging on.
چند دقیقه میگه لوسی رو بشنو
Used to it. Back, I suppose, turn the clock back to 2008 actually, and 2014 and 2017, I was working in Afghanistan on the long-running soap opera New Home, New Life, which Zari knows well, which is the sort of Afghanistan Archers, effectively. And we were having a conversation one day, and I was asking the group about their prose fiction as opposed to their script writing. And the women in particular were incredibly frustrated at how difficult it is to publish locally their work, let alone globally in translation. I mean, that's just a sort of pipe dream. So we sort of cooked up really with Parand, who's a pen name in here, and Sharifa Passoon, who you'll hear from later. We thought, well, what if I could raise some funds and we could try to start a program that would work with a local partner on the ground there to try to contribute to the local creative infrastructure, because there's no fiction publishing industry, and at the same time work with international editors and international translators to build the capacity of writers. So a conventional writer development program, as you would have in here and many other countries in the world. But there is, it's different, so why not try this? So that's how it started. And Parand and Sharifa have been by our side really all the way. And that was the germ of the idea. And I think when there's a need like that, then it has a momentum of its own.
But then events changed. And then the situation
there was quite a lot
evolved
before.
in the run-up to events. So how did you manage?
Well, before that,
period?
In the sort of quiet period, if you like, which wasn't quiet, as you say, which was a highly difficult time if you're living in Afghanistan with, security was at its sort of fiercest, really, which is why we had to do the project from afar. It was all remote. It was across 3 time zones, across 3 countries. One of our editors, Sunila Galapati, was based in Sri Lanka. We started by putting out an open call, as you would conventionally do, to see. A lot of people said, oh, you'll get 20 submissions, you might, if that. I remember saying to Zari, I think, nobody thinks anything will come. And we had 120. And I remember sitting in the British Library with Ali Reza Abiz, who was the first reader, and saying, what are we going to do now? We're going to have to make this into a thing.
And what did you do?
And so then we put a team together. I think that's when I contacted Zari and said, look, we're going to need some readers. We're going to need an Afghan team. And we then started putting it together. And then we put out another open call in 2021, which received 300 submissions right across the country. One from Jowzjan province, which is by Maliha, which is in here, called Sandals. And she responded to a poster in her village. And by then we had quite a good network of people putting around posters all around the more remote villages. And she hand-wrote a story, gave it to her brother, who photographed it on WhatsApp, gave it to his friend, who passed it to somebody else on their phone. And eventually it got to us, and it's now here. And after many drafts and much conversation. So I could go on about the process, but our process essentially was a translator, editor, and writer on WhatsApp calls And in fact, the worst connection we had was Nagin, one of the translators in Croydon, who kept dropping out. Like, everything's going, where's Nagin? Nagin's gone. So the connection across Kandahar to Jazjan was, without fail, over 2.5 years, we never had a call that didn't work. It was just extraordinary.
And you used WhatsApp,
We used
Zoom?
We used WhatsApp, we used a bit of Zoom, but then internet data is expensive. And not everyone has a computer, not everyone has control of the computer in their household, but most women have a phone.
And did you manage to bring the women together, or were you talking to them individually?
Yeah, so part of it was, one of the things I think that's really, one of the real positives of this has been a local network became established very quickly. And what people really valued, writing's lonely, as many people in this room know. And if you're writing's lonely in the UK, let alone in Jazjan, when people don't even think what you're doing is a serious business. And so to be connected with, be nice to hear what Massa might say on this actually, but to be linked up with other people in the same position as you became very clearly became very popular. And now, even now, if I held up my phone, the WhatsApp group, which is still going, will be talking to each other in Pashto and Dari literally since 2019, actually. And so in the end, anyway, to cut a long story short, we worked with a group of 30 writers over that period, on and off, and 18 of them are featured in here.
And tell me, so events in Afghanistan were complicated at the best of times, and then things shifted very dramatically, and there was a major upheaval, actually very fast. How did you manage this process together with your team? And where were you at that particular point?
You mean in August?
August and the run-up to August, yes. And
well,
subsequent to August, 2021.
Yeah. It was a very painstaking, long process because translation is at its heart. So everything is, nobody was speaking English. So everything, we had 5 translators and Zara's one. And so just to say that, so between 2019, halfway through 2019 and last April, everything was very patient, very painstaking. Our challenges were logistical rather than anything else. And then suddenly everything changed almost overnight, really, actually. It was very, very sudden. And we turned from a creative program into a sort of emergency safeguarding situation where the writers, 4 of the writers had been published on Words Without Borders in December 2020, and the Bagri Foundation, one of our funders, along with British Council and many others, had published them various stories. So we had to scrub the internet clean of any trace of all 30 writers pretty immediately. And that was 2 weeks of 24/7, really, trying to remove any trace for safety because we just didn't know what was going to happen. And at that time, our interpreter, who was based in Kandahar, Pashtana Durrani, was escaping, was a very prominent human rights activist. She was trying to escape. And it has to be said that throughout that time, we never stopped doing editorial calls because the group were insistent that they carried on. Pashtana insisted that she carried on interpreting them in hiding whilst being moved at one point. I said, "Where are you?" She was in the back of a van somehow.
Going where?
We don't know. I'm not telling you even if I know. But so the commitment and the sort of utter dedication to each other's work was absolutely beyond impressive, really. And even if we wanted to stop, we couldn't stop. I tried to stop because I was being told to stop. for fear of security, but we had to change. We changed modes and operated in slightly different ways, but we carried on because, apart from anything else, Katerina was waiting for a manuscript. So some of the stories were still there, and we needed to get them into a state where Maclehose were going to
Take it on.
carry on with what we wanted, what the writers wanted.
It's an extraordinary story, I mean, itself, almost. But Zari, it would be really interesting to hear from you. You know, what was it like to translate some of the stories? I mean, you're an Afghan woman, you work in London, you have an understanding of 2 cultures at least, probably many more. What was it like to translate them?
First, as an Afghan woman, I was very excited to read from my women. It was just beautiful to see the talent that is hidden. And as Lucy said at the beginning, always I have seen working with Afghan women, people don't have a belief in their capacity. And I always believed in it. And seeing all these stories coming, hundreds of them, and reading all of them, it just made me proud. And also the translation was hard. It's a hard job because I, as an Afghan woman, knew when Masuma writes about the suicide bombing, the feeling that involves in that, the losing of family members that are involved in it. So taking care of those feelings and those little emotions that are in those words. So I just wanted to be very careful not to miss with it and just bring their real voice and their real feelings into the story and just give them the chance to have their own identity in each story. And it takes time and it's like very detailed work. So it was challenging, but luckily we did it. And also as an Afghan woman, for me, it was a very emotional time. As Lucy said, things were rapidly changing in Afghanistan during that time when I was in editorial calls with Lucy and Sonella. And I remember translating one of the stories, and I had a baby. My daughter was born then. I was a new mom, and a maternity hospital was attacked. And it was like a very emotionally challenging time for me to see mothers and babies dying. And I was like translating stories of my women, the babies of my country, and the schoolgirls. And then a school was attacked. So it was like a very emotional time as an Afghan to live here. And I knew the potential these women had. I knew the potential of those girls that were going to school and they were attacked and brutally murdered. So those potentials were like destroyed. And at the same time, it was a proud moment to work on something with Afghan women and meeting them, hearing them, speaking to them in my own language. It was
because these are
beautiful.
Fiction, we should say.
They're fiction, but I want to come back to that. I mean, they're fiction, but they start with something.
Well,
that
2 of the
is
stories,
relevant.
and we should give our thoughts to the maternity hospital today. Just ironic when hearing that this morning and reading Zainab's original submission, which was about that attack. 2 of the stories in here are directly inspired by real-life incidents. The wedding hall suicide bomb attack in 2020 and the attack on the school. But the others are fiction, but as we all know,
they are all fiction. They're all inspired, but they're all about our lives. They're all about our stories, our literature, our culture. It's about how Afghanistan smells, how Afghanistan looks, how beautiful Afghanistan is. So like I believe as a journalist and as a writer myself that every fiction has a theme of something that has happened or a story that's happened somewhere and you get an inspiration.
But Zari, how did you approach it? Because you say you're a writer as well and you're a journalist, but in this case you were a translator and you had to translate words and meaning from others in a language that you know well into another language. How did you do that? Because it's so important that the nuance does not get lost in translation.
Of course, yes.
And one of the things in this book is the incredible detail and attention to detail. It's very lyrical in part.
Yeah.
So I just wondered how you approached that.
It was obviously, as Lucy said, it's not first draft when it comes to the book, and it's the same with translation. It's not the first draft of the translations.
There were two languages.
Yeah, two languages. I did both Pashto and Dari. And in Afghanistan, when you're speaking to Pashtuns, they have certain little details about their culture, or when you're speaking to Tajiks, they have certain little details about their culture. So, like, keeping that in mind and understanding the culture, I think made it a bit easier for me. And also, I knew that this was something that these women have worked so hard on, and I have to keep their real voice and who their real personality is. And every writer has a style, their own style. And by reading it again and again and going through the little details, I think that was to overcome. And it wasn't, for me, it wasn't first time I had translated something like this, but specifically to this book or these stories, it was fiction and it was very literary, full of literature, full of color. And so it was not easy, but by just checking it with Lucy and also keep checking with the writers, are you happy with this? This is what you mean. So we can keep the real essence of the story.
We had to search for literary translators in Dari and Pashto in that there really aren't any.
Yeah.
There's one in Sweden, there's one in America. They're very expensive, the one.
Well,
so we put together a team who were learning about literary translation as well on the job, as it were.
So there's a whole, it's painstaking work, it's very specialized, and it really needed a very collaborative approach in every way. But let's turn to a writer, and who is actually in Sweden as a refugee. And I will ask Zari, please, to translate, if you could. And hello, Masuma Kasawi, how are you?
Masuma جان کوثری میگه چطور هستین؟ سلام.
سلام، تشکر. من به شما، به خانم لوسی سلام میگم.
Thank you so much. I also want to say hello to all of you and Lucy.
We're delighted that you're here. I think we're all delighted. And it's wonderful to meet you.
میگه بسیار خوش هستیم که خودت با ما هستیم شب و بسیار خوش هستیم که با خودت ملاقات میکنیم.
تشکر. من همچنان همین احساس متقابل دارم.
Thank you so much and I feel the same.
Masuma, I want to just ask you, you've been involved in the story and you've written 2 stories in this anthology. And I just wondered, what was it like for you to work on this project?
مسومه جان خودت میگه 2 قصه داری، کتاب داری که چاپ شده، خودت یکی از نویسنده ها بودی. میگه میتونی بر ما بگویی که چگونه بود کاری نوشتنت و چگونه یک پروسه بود؟
بله، کار از جای خیلی خوبی شروع شد. ما افغانستان بودیم و هیچ فکرش نمی‌کردیم که یک روز من مثلا از یک کشور اروپایی بزنم، مثلا همراه لوسی جان یا خودت گپ بزنم. ولی خود قصه ما یک قصه دیگه شد، فکر میکنم. شروع کار ما یک قصه دیگه تبدیل به قصه دیگه شد.
She says it started in a very beautiful time. I was in my country when we started writing these stories and working on these stories. And it changed a lot because I had to become a refugee and leave my country. But it was a nice, beautiful process. But a lot has changed.
Yes. I mean, as I mentioned, you have 2 stories in this anthology. And there's a particular story that I would like to focus on, which is your story, An Imprint on the Wall.
میگه داری کتاب خودت 2 قصه داری و ما میخوایم در این بخش سر داستان خودت که نقش بر دیوار است یا تصویر بر دیوار سر از او فوکس کنیم، تمرکز کنیم.
And it describes a really horrific incident and a bomb blast with almost poetic precision.
میگه این داستانه که خودت نوشته کردی، این داستان یک حادثه بسیار دلخراش و غم‌انگیز است، یک انفجار بمب، ولی طوری که نوشته کردی با بسیار مهارت، بسیار مقبول نوشتهش کردی با استفاده از ادبیات. Thank you.
Masuma, could you tell us a bit about the story and also why you wrote it?
میگه مسعود جان میتونی یک کم در مورد این داستانت بر ما بگویی و بگویی که چرا خواستی نوشتهش کنی؟
خب در ادامه سال پیششان باید بگم من خیلی سال است که شروع کردم بنوشتن، تقریبا 20 و چند سال است، ولی در بین یک وقفه تقریبا چند سال افتاد که من ننوشتم و بعد موضوع پروگرام لوسی جان باعث شد که من دو مرتبه شروع کنم بنوشتن. بعد فکر میکنم مطالبی که در طول چند سال من ننوشته بودم به شکل همین نقشی بر دیواری دفعه تانستم از بیرونشان کنم.
She says, I had been writing before this project. For nearly 20 years I've been writing stories. But then I had a pause. I stopped writing until I was contacted by Lucy and I resumed the story writing. And this story comes as a collection of memories or ideas that I had collected in all those years that I stopped writing. And it's a mixture of those feelings and those ideas that I've tried to write in one story.
And you wrote this, how long ago did you write it?
میگه این داستان چی وقت نوشته کردی؟
قبل از پروگرام انتولد میشه گفت که اولین خطایش شروع کردم بنوشتن، ولی خب باز ماندن. ولی پروگرام انتولد دیگه باعث شد که این داستان به ثمر برسه باز. یعنی همین حدود همین سالهای 2016 فکر کنم اولین خطش نوشته بودم، ولی بعد در 2021 دیگه چی شد تکمیل شد.
I had made first little notes about the story in 2016, but I never wrote it. And when I started with Untold Project, then it was, for me, it felt like this is the time that I need to write the story. And that's how it was developed during my work with Untold.
But Massima, writing can be, I mean, Lucy already referred to that, it can be quite a lonely business. So could you tell us a bit more, how did you find working with other writers?
مسومه جان میگه طوری که لوسی گفت نوشتن یا داستان نویسی یک مرحله است که آدم تنها می باشدش. بسیار شاید بعضی وقتا احساس تنهایی کنه، ولی خودت با دیگه نویسنده های زن که در این پروژه آشنا شدی با اونا می دیدی، چی گونه احساسی برات بود؟ چطور یافتی این پروسه را؟
خیلی عالی بود. فکر میکنم ما هرگز همین زنایی که در گروه هستن هرگز خانم لوسی رو فراموش نمیکنیم. یک لطف خیلی زیاد در حق ما کردن، باعث شدن یک صداهایی که خفته بود یا بی صدا بود بلند شدن. فکر میکنم ما هیچ وقت خانم لوسی را و لطفی که در حق ما کردن فکر میکنم ما هیچ وقت فراموشش نمیکنیم.
She says it was great. It was so good to be connected with the other writers, and we had never met and we had never connected before, and it is thanks to Lucy and the project that she made it possible for us to be in a group and to be connected and to not feel so lonely when you're writing. And it was just amazing, and I don't think any of us will ever forget the kindness of this project and Lucy.
Well, we will applaud in a minute.
It's not the point.
we meant to be applauding the writers, yes. Massima, you now live in Sweden and you're a refugee.
میگه حالا مسومه جان خودت در سویدن هستی و یک مهاجر هستی دیگه.
بله، دفعه چندم است که مهاجر میشم.
Yes, it's a few times I've become a refugee.
Right. But you're displaced, and so you've been displaced a few times. How are you managing to write? Or will you write some more?
میگه حالا که خودت مهاجر هستی و به یک بار دیگه هم بی خانه شدی، بی جا شدی، آیا نوشته میکنی عالم داستان؟
بله حتما.
الان داری؟
حتما بله.
حالا کدام چیز نوشته داری؟
هنوز شروع نکردم، ولی خب زیاد چیز هستن که بعد نوشتشن کنم. چرا؟ شروع نکردم.
Definitely I will be writing. I haven't started writing yet, but there are a lot of things that I need to write.
That you need to write.
Yeah.
Massima, thank you. We're going to, I'm going to stop for now because we will now ask Zari to read in English an excerpt from your story, an imprint on the wall.
ما امروی خودت استاپ میکنیم ما یک بخشی از داستان خودت میخوانم که به زبان انگلیسی است.
But stay, because there will be questions for you later.
بعد لطفاً باش چون همگی میخوای از خودت سوال کنه خب. That day on the side of the street, she said her goodbye to everyone. Rana had chosen her path a long time ago, that if she did not succeed in the concours examination, she would not accept a path in life that would take her to a place where she would feel foreign. She had made her decision while she was still in Iran, long after her father was taken captive by the communists for his beliefs. She was living with her family in Mashhad, where by then they had been for years. One day after school, as she was sweating under her black chador, feeling weary, her friend said that she was tired of this place and wanted to leave. Rana had agreed. I would like to go too, to my father, to my forebears and my identity. Her friend had laughed at her and said, I am going to Germany to find myself a new identity. I'm tired of this chador, this hijab, and everything here. I want to build everything anew. I wish to go to Kabul, Rana had said. My father is alive. He is not Taliban anymore. He is in the parliament. He is the people's representative. I will find him, and I am sure that my wounds of loneliness will heal. In time, she did find him when she returned to Afghanistan at 21 years, a year before she started her studies in architecture. His appearance had changed. The white hairs of age could not be hidden by him shaving his beard and mustache. And she doubted if she had ever seen her father in a white shirt, suit, and a tie, the way he was dressed that day. She had asked him, do you have a daughter with the name of Rana? But he had changed only in appearance, not in his belief. He was silent, and the memory of his words ran through her head. I just could not leave my inheritance to my daughter. She left him and went to Sangcharak, to the village she had left 17 years before. She found that almost everything had fallen to the ground. The graves of the nameless remained intact, but the houses, the streets, and the gardens were now dust and stones.
Thank you. Thank you, Zari. Really, this is applause for Masuma, I think.
میگه این کل چکچکا برای خودت از معصومه جان.
Thank you. تقدیم بکنم به لوسی.
She says I represented to Lucy.
Zari, thank you very much also for reading. I just want to turn to you now just for a second, because we talked earlier about translation. But I'd like to sort of get your take on what the main themes are that struck you when working on the project. What have you taken away from the process?
Yeah, there are like stories. There are different stories. There's stories of love, stories of identity, as you heard, stories about friendship, the little jealousies that are involved in some friendships. There are stories of being a woman in a country like Afghanistan. There are stories of being born as a girl and not being welcomed in your family. And they're just there. And in whole, you can find stories that will relate to all of you here. Like a lonely mother whose children have all gone to Europe because of a better life. And she's living alone in Kabul. And she's just connecting with them through Skype, through a video call. And they just see each other's presence. So it's stories of us as human beings. We have different cultures and different style of living, but at the end we are human and we do the same things. So these are stories of and also feelings of Afghan women, how they feel if you're not gonna, if you don't want to be a woman anymore, you know.
And also they should probably say that they were all written, well, they were all written before August 2021, yes. And yet some of them have taken on a new, renewed poignancy, really, since
yes.
then, particularly like Mariam Majoba's Companion, which is the first story in the book about the mother that's left behind.
And there's a story of the one pillow.
Oh,
my
God,
pillow. Oh,
sorry.
It's a beautiful one. It's about becoming a refugee.
Yeah.
And it suddenly was like hitting all of us because we were becoming
refugees
and
in fact
again.
We talked about not including it because it was the least fictional in a way. And
with the whole refugee crisis.
Yes, now it's
but
the most poignant one of all, actually.
Yeah.
About, it's very sweet, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a very sweet story.
But Zari, you know, what is important for us as readers to understand?
As readers and also as people in Europe, I want all of you to understand the potential that is involved in Afghan women, the talent they have, to understand them. The Afghan woman in a blue burqa we see on our TV channel is not all of it. There's so much more to the life of Afghan women. There's so much more to the life of Afghan girl. And they're going through a very, very dark time of their life. They're denied basic rights. Imagine you and me not being able to be sitting here because there are men in this room. That is what they're denied. There might not be bombs and might not be shelling on the street anymore, but they've lost so much. I cannot imagine my daughter not going to school just because she's a girl and her brother going to school. So this is what Afghan women are going. And I want everyone not to forget Afghanistan, not to forget Afghan women, not to forget Afghan girls, because we gained so much in the last 20 years. We thought things were changing for us. And this is what represents them, these stories that are there, the talent they have, the potential they have, and how sad will it be to not have this potential develop anymore with the next generation, with the young generation, and what the tragedy it is for humanity. And that's what is happening at the moment.
Yeah, thank you, Zari. And Lucy, kind of building on that, the creative process. So how does the conflict and displacement, Masuma said she's been multiply displaced. She's now in Sweden. We don't know how long at all. How does that affect the creative process? And how has it affected people's writing?
Well, out of the 18 writers here, 10 are now, have been or are in other countries. Iran, Tajikistan, Sweden, Italy, Germany, US, Australia.
Including Pashtuna, yeah.
Including Pashtuna, yeah,
One
America,
translated.
yes. None are in the UK, and 8 remaining in Afghanistan. So they're all in, the group are all in very different situations. Some have stopped writing temporarily during the movement. Some are still on the move. Most are writing and are determined to carry on, and we are continuing with the program, and so we are continuing to write with them. And they have actually, during August, when for a period we had to talk about ceasing the network because it was too dangerous, but the group said, no, we want to carry on with that, and we have to keep talking to each other because we have to keep our creativity going at the moment. It's the only thing that's keeping us going. And so the group began a diary that it is being written via sort of, well, it was on a certain mode of mobile phone, now it's on WhatsApp. And that's been going since the middle of August. And every day, these 18 writers are sharing thoughts and ideas still in the diary. And that continues. And meanwhile, they're writing to a greater or lesser degree. I mean, Mariam Majobo has sent a news story just this morning, despite the Taliban having searched their houses last weekend. And in the diary, there are accounts of people having to soak their notebooks. I think we saw that, didn't we? There were sort of balls of blue paper to erase the ink. Sharifa was getting out a burqa that she hadn't got out of a drawer for 25 years and wondering how she could put it on to go out into the street. So the diary is very raw and very sort of the moment. But the best thing about it also is that people are sharing story ideas and encouraging each other to keep going. And I know Massima will keep going, because Massima is one of the most prolific of the group.
And Massima was saying, maybe you want to just quickly summarize that we're talking about the creative process and what happens as a result of the event.
معصومه جان لوسی و نیکولا در مورد از اینکه میزنه که چطور پروسه را ادامه میدیم. لوسی از کارهایی که شما از طریق واتساپ یعنی دایری یا خاطرهایی که نوشته کردین از او یادم میاد و اینکه چطور پروسه را پیش میبریم. It's fine.
And how you said earlier that Massima, that you were thinking of writing something. You have many ideas. Have you managed to write anything since you left Afghanistan?
میگه خودت پیشتر گفتی که بسیار چیزایی هست که باید بنویسی. مسائل هست که باید سرش نوشته کنی. آیا از زمانی که افغانستان ترک کردی نوشته کردی یا نه؟
نه متاسفانه به چند ماه نتونستم چیزی بنویسم.
She says sadly I haven't.
But she's been
I'm not
the
surprised.
diary.
Yeah, but اما در خاطرهایی که نوشته میکنین از طریق واتساپ نوشتی چیزایی؟
تا یک مدتی تونستم بنویسم بعد اونم دیگه نتونستم ادامه بدم.
She said for a while I did contribute and I wrote, and then after that it just stopped.
So we have to. So everyone in the room is urging her to carry on.
Yeah.
You have to.
کلگی که در اینجا هستن همگی شما میخوای که نوشته کنی روان کنی دیگه.
حتما چرا.
There's 5,000 people here.
You
can't let them down.
But Massima, we're going to now turn to one of your colleagues who is unfortunately not here today, and we have a pre-recorded video. And I think, again, that highlights quite a number of different issues. And I don't know, again, I'm sorry, Zari, again, would you read an excerpt from Sharifa Passoon, The Late Shift? And we will then have in a minute, I'm just looking at the wonderful technical people over there, we will have the pre-recording of her statements. And yes.
You want me to read first?
I think we just
that would be
just
nice.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Set up the
and if you could
story.
explain about the story.
This is one of my most favorite stories.
Why we chose it.
And I'm glad that you guys put it. Yeah. This is about a young mother who is a TV presenter. And she is working during a time when Kabul was attacked by rockets. And it just has beautiful details of a day of her life during that time when she goes and gets prepared for reading the main news at 8 p.m. in Afghanistan, and the whole journey, her daily journey of her working life, and the way she says goodbye to her son, and the way every moment she risks her life with doing this job. So it's about, a very prominent Afghan woman, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. And I will read a little bit. Sangha was alone in the room, looking out of the window. She saw that it was now dark. She didn't like being alone, so she made her way to the newsroom. At the top was the editor's desk. He usually stayed behind his 8-hour shift. This was an important office, and everyone from the editor to reporters, producers, and support staff even were paid for overtime. As Sangha entered the newsroom, she greeted her colleagues and went straight over to the long desk in the middle of the room. One of her colleagues told her that not all her notes were ready yet, but she could have the ones that were. Sangha was busy marking the scripts and reading it aloud when there was another whistling sound, followed by a huge explosion. This time the rocket had hit the technology building, newly built, just behind the National Radio and TV headquarters. The explosion was so powerful that it shattered the windows of the newsroom. A sharp breeze blew in. It was still autumn, but the weather was cold. Someone opened the door and said, "All of you, go to the lower floor now. It's possible that more rockets will strike." Everyone began panicking and left their seats. Most of the staff took their pens and papers with them as they hurried out, but Sangha left her notes behind on the table. Someone came close and whispered in her ear, "Don't be scared. Everything will be fine." Sangha said, "I have seen many rockets. They land every day. I'm not scared of rockets. I'm scared of God." No sooner had she finished her sentence that another rocket landed, striking the front of the nearby administrative building. If you looked down from the newsroom window, you could see the building's rooftop. As Sangha reached the door of the newsroom, a piece of shrapnel hit the chair that she had been sitting on only a few seconds earlier.
Thank you. And I think we'd like to show a clip now of the writer so you can hear the actual voice of the person who wrote this. And it's audio only because it's not actual video, so we can start that. Yes, thank you.
دوستانو د کیسو لوستونکو د کیسو لیکوالو او د کیسو خپرونکو السلام علیکم. زه له افغانستانه کیسې لیکم. د افغانستان د خلکو د ژوند په باب لیکم. دا کار سخت زړه‌توب غواړي ځکه چې پرته له شکه یو درد او ژور خفګان پکې پروت دی. په تیره بیا کله چې د کیسې کرکټرونه ښځې وي خامخا لوستونکي په داستان کې بیان شوی درد او خفګان احساسوي. په 2013 کال مې د لنډو کیسو لیکل پیل کړل. د یو کال په موده کې مې 10 کیسې ولیکلې. د 2019 کال په 3مه ربع کې کله چې میرمن لوسی د انتول د پروژې کار پیل کړ خپله یوه لنډه کیسه مې ورته ولیږله. د انتول ټیم په هلو ځلو هغه ایډیټ او خپره شوه. وروسته مې بله کیسه هم ورولېږله. دغو دواړو کیسو د افغان ښځو غورچان کیسو کې د خپرېدو چانس ترلاسه کړ. په دې کیسو کې مې د جګړې په کلونو کې د افغان عادي او معمولي ښځو ژوند انځور کړی چې څنګه د جګړې او خطر نه ډکو حوادثو په لړ کې کار، فعالیت او زده کړې کوي او خپلو اهدافو ته د رسیدو په خاطر زیار باسي. د افغان ټولنې حوادث چې تر ډیره بریده خواشینونکي دي په خبرونو کې خپریږي چې نړیوال ترې خبریږي. خو زما هدف د دې کیسو د عادي کرکټرونو د ژوند پیښې او د دوی په ژوند کې شته ننګونې دي. که ونه لیکل شي ښایي څوک ترې خبر نشي. په افغانستان کې ښځې له داستان لیکلو سره مینه لري. دوی کیسې لیکي. ننګونې شته. دلته تیرو 20 کلونو کې د لیکوالو اتحادیه نه وه چې لیکواله دې ورشي خپل آثار هلته وروړي. دلته د لیکوالو دپاره د کیسه لیکلو په برخه کې ورکشاپونه او یا داسې غونډې چې د هغوی کیسې دې ولوستل شي، هغه دې نقد شي او یا هم چاپ شي. د یوې لیکوالې په صفت زه خپله نه پوهیږم چې کیسه مې چاته د نقد، ایډیټ او خپرولو په خاطر واستوم. که شخصي اقدام کوم دا کار پیسو ته ضرورت لري. انتولد په دې بریالی شو چې افغاني کیسه لیکوالې په یو ګروپ کې تنظیم کړي. د دې ګروپ له برکته ما د خپل هیواد لیکوالې وپیژندلې او رابطه مې ورسره پیدا شوه. د هغوی کیسې مې ولوستلې. اوس مهال ژوند زما په وطن کې بدل شوی. شپه او ورځ د ډزو، بمبارد، چاودنو او د امبولانسونو د آلارم غږونه نشته. خو نورې زیاتې مسئلې شته. له پخوا نه مې هوډ د لیکوالۍ دپاره غښتلی شوی. غواړم د دغو ټولو بدلونونو په باب ولیکم چې راتلونکي نسلونه او نړیوال ترې بې خبره پاتې نشي. ډېر د خوښۍ احساس لرم چې د نورو افغانو ښځو لیکوالو ترڅنګ زما کیسو هم د خپرېدو بخت ترلاسه کړ. دا کیسې په انګلیسي ژبه وژباړل شوې، نړیوالو لوستونکو ته وړاندې شوې. نن ورځ د انتول ټیم زما قلم د مرغۍ وزر دی د کتاب کار د خپرندویه مؤسسې په مرسته سرته رسولی دی. لویه لاسته راوړنه ده. مبارک دې وي.
Thank you so much. That was... You can. I actually don't want to add anything more to this because I think it speaks for itself. But I would like to invite you, if you have any questions. I particularly want to, and I've forgotten to say that right at the beginning, and I'm looking at the cameras, how wonderful it is to have such a large online audience. And I would invite you to also send in questions. Nothing too lengthy because I can't promise to put it all together and I'm not a trained sort of Newsnight presenter. But if any questions, and if I could ask you, if you have questions, there are people with microphones who will come to you and then you can ask your questions, and it'd be wonderful to get some feedback from you. Thank you. Yes, the lady in the front.
Thank you. This is really moving and also really gives huge courage, admiration for the courage of and the resilience of the women who keep writing. I just wondered if you could say if they've drawn on sort of local poetry, oral traditions of literature, myths, and so on. Because I think Lucy mentioned there wasn't a huge publishing sector in Afghanistan, but is there any publishing of fiction going on? And isn't there some kind of historical tradition of poetry and so on? That.
Yeah, I was just going to say there may not be publishing industry, but there's a vast history of literature, which is
We have a very rich history of literature, poetry, and specifically the involvement of women in that. The women that have taken part in poetry. We have had very, very poignant poets like Rabi Balkhi, like Nazoana in our history, who recited poems during the war during the British Empire. And Rabi Balkhi was in love and she was killed for that crime. And she wrote her poems on a wall, and her shrine is still in the north of Afghanistan, which I have luckily visited. I wish she was alive. And also in the new generation, we have had really, really strong poetry by women. They will get published in local magazines or local papers sometimes, but not as much as men get published or they get valued. A lot of women, Nadia Anjuman, she was a young poet, like about 15 years ago. She was murdered for reciting poems about how she felt as a woman. So they take a risk with writing, but we have a rich tradition of storytelling. Women, grandmas, they spend the long winter nights in telling stories to grandchildren and to family members. They sit together, and that's how they spend long nights.
So a tradition of oral storytelling.
Yes.
Lucy.
But it tends to stay, correct me if I'm wrong, in the home more. That's the sort of difference, I suppose, in this. And I should say that originally we were working with a local partner, so had last August not happened, this book would be published in Pashto and Dari. But sadly, we're not able to do that yet for security reasons.
But as such as publishing house that you could go and you present your work, doesn't even exist for men properly. So a lot of books that are getting published, you have, as a writer, you have to pay to get published. It's not the other way around here. So it's quite a difficult process, and also you have to have connection, you have to have the freedom which many women, especially in the provinces, far away regions, they might not have that.
And some of these stories are quite taboo. I mean, one is exploring transgender in here, and you wouldn't probably want to set about doing that at the moment.
Yeah.
And it crosses lines.
Yeah.
It crosses lines that completely are not permissive. There were some more questions. The gentleman behind.
You've answered it. I just wanted to ask about local readership.
Right. Are there any other questions or burning comments? Sorry. Somebody, oh yes. No? I mean, somebody looked excited. Please, go ahead. Okay, one person there, sorry. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for sharing this with us. Where do we go from here? It's wonderful to hear that you've got further work coming through and further collections. And it's also wonderful that you've found your voices, or you have an opportunity to express your voices. But obviously the situation in Afghanistan is desperate. Where are things going?
Lucy, would you like
in
to
which
first
department?
start, and then we have
I mean, in the country or in the
In the writing?
Well, in terms of the lot of women in Afghanistan today, you know, and you've given us a real insight into the lives that people have been leading. I appreciate that it's fiction, but inspired by reality. But is it going to be more of the same in the future? Is there hope that things can change?
One thing as an Afghan I've learned, that we never give hope. We lose, we get hit badly, and then we rebuild. That's what we have done for the last 40 years, people of Afghanistan, and especially women and girls. I know for a fact that there are underground schools for the teenage girls who are not allowed to go to schools. There are underground trainings done by women for girls in local communities. So those things continue to go on, but on a large scale, as I said, it's a very disappointing time for Afghan women, and they definitely feel left and forgotten by the international community, by the people who promised them. They show them a beautiful world outside, and a lot of the girls that I spoke to, they were like in their 20s, and they grew up in the last 20 years, so they didn't see the dark time of the Taliban before. So it was just like a shock for many, and leaving your country, leaving everything behind, starting from scratch. I know many of my friends, they still live in hotel rooms for 6 months now. So, and those are families with kids, with children who need education, who need many things. But in terms of writing, I think it will continue. And sadly, as an Afghan woman, I will say that our writings will still be sad. They will be about tragic topics.
Maybe we could turn to Massima, because maybe you could ask her where she thinks things are going for women writers. Can we just stick to women writers, because it's quite a big question I think you've asked.
میگه که به نظر خودت سوال میکنن که آینده زنای افغان، خصوصا زنای نویسنده را چگونه میبینی؟ دخترایی که میخواستن نویسنده شون، آله در این شرایط فعلی.
یکی از خبرایی که من پیشترم در اسکایپ ماندم در صفحه ما راجع به این بود که یک مسابقه داستان نویسی در شهر بلخ مزار شریف برگزار شده بود که در اون 3 تا از دختر خانم‌ها نفر اول، دوم، سوم شده بودن. راستش حوادث افغانستان قسمی پیش میره که هیچ فکر میکنی که هیچ نمیتونه پیش بینی کنی. 6 ماه پیش ما حتی فکرش هم نمیکردیم که در یک شب سرنوشت ما رقم تغییر بخوره و تمام 20 سال ما پس برگردیم به نقطه اول. با اون خاطر خیلی سخت است نظر دادن، خیلی سخت است حرف زدن، چون نمیفهمم هفته آینده چی خواهد شد، ماه آینده چی خواهد شد، مثلا زندگی ما چه رقم میشه، ما به کجا میافتیم.
She says it is so difficult to think what will happen the next day when you're an Afghan. 6 months ago I was in Kabul and my life suddenly changed. And I didn't expect it. So it's very hard for me to think like what the next moment will be in our life. But then I heard the news today that there was a writing competition between writers in North Afghanistan, and 3 girls participated in that. So that made me a little bit happy, but it's a very challenging time for us, because to keep happy or to keep hopeful is a bit hard at the moment, because we don't know where our lives will be.
Thank you very much. Are there any other... Lucy, did you want to add to this?
No, I think, well, we intend to carry on as a... You'll find a leaflet on your seat. And so there you are, you know what to do. And so we intend to carry on, because we're not going to... I think that's not the trouble, but the challenge of doing something like this is that it's impossible. It's possible to detach, really, when we become so closely involved in a way. And so, no, I was just going to say that for the writers that are remaining in Kabul and in the rest of Afghanistan, the word, it's just it's uncertainty the whole time. It's uncertain, it's uncertain. Even last weekend, you know, Mariam didn't know what was going to happen. At the end of Saturday, and on Saturday morning, we, you know, had to remove various things offline, and by the evening it was okay. But, you know, this is happening all the time. Mm-hmm. So it's uncertain.
I'm just going to take a question online now, and it's quite an interesting question, which to both of you. But can you say a bit about the variety of women whose work is included? In particular, are there any girls? And when girls went to school, would they have had any training in creative writing? Do you want to start, or do you want to? Have they had training in creative writing?
Not as such, not officially, but in schools, like especially we have subject of like Dari literature and Pashto literature, and it's like an official subject in Afghan schools. So a lot of this kind of creativity, and you write essays, there is a thing, but officially to have a training workshop to become a writer, it doesn't exist, especially for women and girls, it doesn't exist. There might be workshops for men or boys organized in local communities, but for women it doesn't exist. But as I said, the whole culture and the whole tradition of storytelling, and specifically women playing that role of the storyteller, it just enables them to have this talent, this potential. And among the writers, there are writers from everywhere, from Helmand, from Balkh, from
and
Georgia.
Different ethnicity.
Yes, and different ethnicity, Pashtuns, Tajiks, Hazaras. It's like there are different writers, and they're all connected. So and different ages as well.
And that's what some of the writers said about this group, is that it's really nice being in a group of mixed ethnicity, where you've got a common bond that is nothing to do with that. And all the writers on this program are over 18, but they range from 22 to 62.
Right.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions from you in the audience right in front of us? Or are you all stunned by the phenomenal achievements of these stories?
I think there is a question.
Oh, no, suddenly lots of questions coming up. Okay, you need a microphone, sorry. No, you need a mic. Yep.
Yeah,
yep.
The video,
yep.
I think.
And you have to wait till... Now they're coming around the back door. Excellent. Just describing it to the online audience.
Hello, hi.
Hi.
Firstly, thank you very much for everyone for sharing your stories tonight. I wanted to ask Lucy about the other writers. You said you had 300 submissions. What happened to the ones that weren't picked?
Thank you.
Good question, and tricky, in that, as we all know, if you put an open call out for writers anywhere in the world, you'll get many, many submissions. And you can't work with everybody, resource-wise. And so what happened to, well, the ones that didn't make the 30, we haven't been in touch with, but we are aware of them, as it were. But I don't know, is the truth. I mean, I know what's happened to the 30, 35 that we've been working with, but not the others. in the recent past. Sadly, it's impossible to, it's hard enough to sort of try and keep the 30 going in a network and from a sort of standing start. But it's a very poignant question. It's a very pertinent question rather than a poignant question. And it's one of those things you can't do everything for everybody.
And I mean, I think it highlights the complexity of managing this kind of thing in a sort of hugely.
And we did have, sorry to interrupt, we had in our readers, when we were whittling down and trying to select who we could work with, I mean, Zariel said, when we had long discussions about many stories and many of the writers, and it wasn't easy.
Yeah, no, because you had to make a choice. I, as an Afghan, would have liked all 300 to be part of the big workshop and continue, but it was difficult. And also, I think there was not budget for so much.
Well,
you have to choose, and this was like almost like a talent-based, and you could see what story has a potential to go more and more forward and who has the best of talent. I think they all had some talent.
And it was about what would appeal to local markets and international markets, because we always intended, as I say, that this would be local as well, as equally importantly as internationally.
Yeah.
But the wonderful thing about this, that this is, it's a fantastic beginning of potentially more.
Yeah. We hope so.
Or we hope more. And I think what I would like to suggest now is maybe there's a lot to reflect on, as based on these stories and what you've heard this evening, and there's obviously a lot more to talk about, but we can do that also informally over refreshments or drinks. The stories I certainly found were intensely personal, and yet I feel particularly at the moment have an enormous global resonance. And there are many sort of delicately phrased lines that are deeply touching, and I mean, the word poignant keeps coming up, but it's been coming up quite a bit, I think, in the course of this evening. And there are also very graphic descriptions of dreadful incidents that are suddenly infused with poetry. So there's a lot of curious tension in all of this. But I think these stories show how much Afghan women could again say and do, if only they could. So I'd like to leave it at that and like to extend a hugely warm thank you to the writers, to Sharifa, Masuma, and all the other writers, and I'd like you all to please applaud all of them. And just to say that the books are available, but what we would ask you is to make a donation, because they can't officially be sold here, and you can give anything between £10 and £1,000 per book. I do think it's really worth it. I think it's an extraordinary read, and I think it reminds us of a sort of, of a humanity and a way in which it's quite empowering to read in many ways. Now, just to say to those online, because you won't have the copy in front of you, the book is published by Sakharov Prize, and I encourage those online to buy it through your usual channels. I won't mention any names. And you look up My Pen is the Wing of a Bird. And thank you all so much for joining this evening. And please join us for drinks. And I'm sorry you can't join us online.
We'll say goodbye to Masuma.
Yeah.
Oh, and oh my God, the most important person. Thank you.
Bye, Masuma.
Masuma, I'm sorry you can't be with us now.
انشالله میبخشی که اینجا همراه ما خودت نبودی و از طریق ویدیو آمدی ولی بسیار تشکر از شرکتت از اینکه
خواهش میکنم.
And thank you so much for joining us.
من تشکر میکنم، خیلی دیدنتون خوشحال شدم. اوقات خیلی خوشی بود، خیلی خوب گذشت.
She says I really enjoyed it and it was a good time. Thank you so much.
And we enjoyed you.
We'll talk to her soon.
زود باز میگه گپ میزنیم لوسی میگه.
تشکر
مسئول جان. خوش شدم که دیدمت.
آرام. همچنان. خداحافظ. خداحافظ شما.
Thank you so much. Bye.
کلاگی بای بای.
Bye.